In just a little under half an hour, Steve Millington, who's the chairman, of course, of the Twin Falls County Republican Party, is scheduled to join us on Top Story this morning. He'll have all sorts of discussion about what's going on at the state capitol in Boise. In fact, we're going to talk a bit more about that, too, later in the program, because day 2 of debate hearings going on at the Capitol about add the words. And some strong testimony yesterday, according to people who were in the room, from people in the gay community who say that they've been discriminated against. So we'll have some details on that coming up as well. But in the meantime, some of you may have been up watching Bill O'Reilly. I must sit up late, but Bill O'Reilly, of course, is not on late Mountain Time. If you were watching Bill O'Reilly's program last night, there was a discussion about 2 weeks ago I had heard, and in fact I heard this I think on Fox News as well. 2 weeks ago I had heard that we would never know what charges would be filed if there were going to be charges filed against Bowe Bergdahl, because that would be kept under wraps. And it would be kept a secret, if you will, a national secret, if something along those lines were going to happen. Well, a retired lieutenant general, now these guys, they're not small fry. Lieutenant generals have a bunch of stars on their shoulders. And in this case, that's what this fellow, he had. His name is Tony Schaefer. Well, actually, he's a retired lieutenant colonel, excuse me. But they also have some details coming in from a lieutenant general who says as well, a source, that what we're looking at are the possible charges any day now of desertion for Bowe Bergdahl, who at one time was considered to be a huge mystery. And people, of course, who knew him in Idaho were clamoring for his release, held in captivity by the Taliban for 5 years, and they were clamoring for his release and wondering if he was still alive, and occasionally a video would surface and he'd be talking on the video. And now we understand, at least from these people, they're saying that sources within the Pentagon are telling them that we're going to see charges. However, the reason we have not seen anything yet, and this is a quote actually from one of Bill O'Reilly's guests last night. This is from the retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, but he goes on to say, "This is shaping up to be a titanic struggle behind the scenes. Believe me, the Army here wants to do the right thing, and the White House, because of the political narrative, President Obama cozying up to the parents, and because President Obama, releasing the 5 Taliban, their narrative is what the White House does not want to have come out." Remember, when this all took place, you had the president at the White House, and he had Bergdahl's parents there. Difficult to tell them apart because they both have the same length hair. All right, Dad had a beard, so I guess it was fairly simple to pick that out. But you took one look at him and you said, hey, this guy likes a big bowl of granola for breakfast every morning, doesn't he? So they had the two of them standing beaming with the president as he announced that there had been a deal worked out with the Taliban, sworn enemy of the United States, we should point out, and all civilized people, to exchange 5 barbarians for Bowe Bergdahl. And now those barbarians can go back to the battlefield and kill more innocent people and more Americans and just wage war incessantly. And Bergdahl was released, and Mr. Obama made it look as if that he was the world's greatest negotiator, and finally had released this poor soul from his bondage. But we learned afterward, and these stories had been bouncing around for years. They never got much traction in establishment media. But the people who served with Bergdahl believed that he had simply decided he wanted to join the other side, and that indeed after leaving, walking away, leaving a note behind from his post, that he had given information possibly to the Taliban that could have resulted, possibly did result, in the deaths of Americans. Now, I don't know a lot about the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but I know if that happened, the worst he could face would be the forfeiture of his own life. And I know there are a lot of people out there who feel that if their own son or daughter, husband or wife, brother or sister or father happen to be killed because of that indeed something must be done. There must be some sort of justice other than just saying, well, we're going to lock the guy up at Leavenworth for a few years. If you'd like to reach Bill Colley this morning on Top Story and have a caller on hold, be patient for a moment. You can reach News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com by telephoning us at 736-0300. A chilly morning, at least to start our day. 31 right now, but looking again for temperatures perhaps flirting with the 50-degree mark. You're on the air. Good morning.
Hey, Bill. It's easy to use a lexicon with just gar- garbage and stuff. But if you want to say the real traitor, the real American traitor, it's Oliver North. Check the
Oh,
facts.
I
So
see.
don't come up here and say
How is
Bergdahl is
tell me how is Oliver
Ol-
North? How do you define Oliver North as a traitor?
Oliver North. Okay, was he selling arms to the terrorists, which is Iran? Wasn't he? Oh yeah, that was him.
Was he
He was
under
giving money.
orders? Was he? I
No.
don't. I don't. I think that was actually Robert McFarland.
Oh no. Then how come he was crying over there and trying to
Do
commit
you know? Do you
suicide?
know who Robert McFarland is, or is it just
Yeah,
because
I
you
know who
see?
Robert McFarlane is.
Right,
Yes,
right. And so,
yeah. But the biggest traitor is Oliver North.
did
Let's
their
go back to
actions
this.
result
Okay,
in the
bye.
did their actions result in the deaths of any American troops? That's all. I just want an answer out of this guy. Uh, Again, English as a second language is difficult for some people. You're up next at 8:12 and 31 degrees. You're on Top Story with Bill Colley.
I think you do a great job, Bill. And I actually thought when Jill left, her boyfriend would go with her, but that guy, he must need enlightened because he keeps listening to you. You're doing a good job, and he needs some hooked on phonics to learn English. Thank you.
I thank you for the call. Look, I have met Oliver North. In fact, a friend of mine, I got him some tickets to sit with Oliver North at a dinner some years ago. And I'm not saying I'm sitting here as a huge Oliver North fan. I met him at a news conference in 1996 or 1997, I believe, and I just got a chance to talk with him off and on, off the cuff, with answering questions and the like, for about 20 minutes or so. I don't know a whole lot about the man. I do know that he was under orders and he followed those orders, and he was the scapegoat for that particular scandal. They threw him under the bus, in other words. But let's get right back to this. Nobody died because of Oliver North's actions. The people who served with Bowe Bergdahl claim, and we have no reason to doubt them, that Bowe Bergdahl got other people, other Americans killed. It's 8:14 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have another caller joining us. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. You know, they knew about him when it was on the news and everything else when he left and got caught that he was potentially abandoning his post.
Look, he was thrown out of the Coast Guard. He was thrown out of the Coast Guard. He had problems there. Nothing had changed with this young fellow.
Yeah, but my point is that there was no news that this whole thing might have turned out into a scandal of that sort. So it's this whole thing is just politics as usual for the other side because of the release of the 5 people for him and everything else. And as far as Jill's friend goes, he needs to remember what the vice president and everything was wrapped up in, and people did die when those guns changed hands. And they didn't catch the guys as they changed the guns' hands, but they still haven't caught the guys even after the people were shot. So don't be talking about that kind of stuff. You guys never like talking about problems that happen on the left side, but they remember everything that goes on the right.
Yeah, well, that's because Oliver North at least had some distinguished service in Southeast Asia, and again felt that he was just following orders, and he felt that he had a mission to destroy some enemies of the United States down in Nicaragua. And look, I don't know all of his motivations, and I'll just put it this way: no one in Oliver North's command and none of the people he served with were killed.
Right, and people on the situation I'm talking about did. Some ATF people and everything else got killed because of it.
Yeah,
so, and this leads directly to the White House.
Sure does.
Don't even. When he starts going down that road, he's opening a bag of worms he doesn't want to open.
Eric Holder could share a prison cell with Bergdahl. Maybe the two could sit around and play pinochle all day.
Yeah, him and his buddy with him.
Yeah. Thank you much for the call, sir. Well, you need somebody to keep company when you're locked up in prison. I understand it's very difficult to find any love. At least that's the story I've heard. You can reach our program today at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What they used to do with people like Bergdahl is just simply line them up against a wall and shoot them. Oh, I think sometimes even in the Civil War, they'd stretch a rope around a guy's neck and then dangle him from a tree. So if indeed his actions did cause the deaths of some of those people that he supposedly they were his comrades. I think that that is a very, very likely possibility. But you know what's going to happen here? In order to try and protect this man so the full story of Mr. Obama's faux pas doesn't come out, they're likely going to find a way to just say, all right, you're going to go sit in a box for a few years. And Mr. Obama, now that he's a lame duck, could even pardon him, I would suspect, and put aside any higher punishment that might come along. I don't think there has been anyone, and there was the movie that Martin Sheen actually played in, the TV movie back in the 1970s about Private Eddie Slovak, who was actually shot. He was executed for desertion in World War II. Not so much because he was the only deserter. In fact, it's not evident that anyone was killed because of his actions, but the Army was trying to point out, hey, you don't do this sort of thing in the middle of wartime. You're up next at 8:17. You're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning. About the CMJ, Military Justice Code.
Right.
The worst crime you can commit in the military is desert in a war zone. Then aiding and abetting the enemy, that in the military is a firing squad offense. That's
Probably.
all I've got to say.
And thank you, but probably not under the Obama White House. The rationale and American liberals don't believe that anybody is responsible for anything they do any longer. And we'll be told, well, he was under such duress and such stress. And, it was the military's mistake for bringing him in after he'd already been booted out of one branch of the service and, moving. Look, he knew the rules, and he just decided that he was going to play savior of the planet from his own perspective or his own vantage point, and had decided that these guys who go around burning women and stoning them to death were much more attuned with his worldview than the people that he happened to be serving with. And so what we've done is we've handed 5 cutthroats back to the enemy so that they can go on terrorizing that part of the world to bring this guy home. And there was actually all that discussion about homecoming parades and the like, and I remember people suddenly backing down from all that, saying, the ticker tape parade might not necessarily be a really good idea for this fellow. And even people who were on the left and who had been looking forward to this suddenly decided that, especially the leftist politicians in Idaho, the few that there are, were wetting their index fingers, putting them up in the air. I say this all the time, and seeing which way the wind was blowing, and the wind was not blowing in their favor. It appears that a great many Americans still have respect for heroes and still have great disdain for traitors. We've got a break coming up in a moment, but we have more on this subject as well as plenty of other things to talk about today. Steve Millington will join us after news, not news rather, but the break at 8:30. I could do news if you'd like me to. In the meantime, it's 20 after, 31 degrees. Hey, I wanted to mention we have a guest coming up in a few minutes, and he joins us on Tuesday mornings. On Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. His name is Steve Millington. And he talks about issues, generally related to a lot of state issues, but also on the local level, too. It has been, I think, other than this particular hearing going on, 3-day hearing right now, and add the words, a relatively quiet couple of days in Boise. At least behind the scenes, it might be a bit more active. But I don't think we're necessarily getting all of the details. And, there are some stories. There's some bills that are worked that are very important, but trying to talk about them, like road bills. Well, let's talk about the repaving of Route 30. It's about as exciting as watching paint dry. We have a caller with us joining me on the air. I hope a caller is still with us. I'm going to call it 825, and we have 30 right now, looking for highs, though, perhaps in the upper 40s. You're up next on Top Story with Bill Colley.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. I'm not one of those guys that'll just hang up on you. I think all of this stuff is happening just the way it always does in America. It's deception and deceit and distraction. You look at what just happened in the Congress. They were voting on a bill to slow down all this murderous abortion of innocent, helpless babies in America, and they didn't do it. Now you got Bowe Bergdahl coming out here, and we got all this argument over Bowe Bergdahl. Nobody's paying attention to that anymore. It's the same thing with the vote. We get them arguing over Democrat and Republican, and now their pride gets in the way, and nobody can see that their vote is worthless anyway.
You ever notice a story lasts about a week to 2 weeks tops? Like remember the girls kidnapped by the terrorist in Nigeria, and there
Yep.
were senators getting up, senators demanding that we needed to rescue these people and we needed change, and then all of a sudden it wasn't on TV any longer, and you didn't hear a peep from anyone.
Oh yeah. Yep.
It,
Absolutely.
just keep us entertained, and perhaps just keep pulling the wool over our eyes. A little later in the program, I'm going to talk about some of those issues. Certain things are happening right under our noses, and we're missing them. And all of this data, big data, is going into a government file somewhere on you. We have another caller with us. You're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Hey, morning, Bill. I just wanted to let you know that could you imagine if this would have been turned around and George Bush would have let all these prisoners go, and what the repercussion would have been with finding out that he deserted? I mean, not that he would have done that to start with, but I tell you, that's just insanity.
Yeah, it's a double standard. Media has been down on its knees for President Obama since he first ran for state senate in Illinois.
Yep, and all all this is all about. Every bit of this is just about protecting this man, and it is just insane how they're trying to protect this man from anything that he has done. And you know what? I don't care what political realm you're from. Man, when you do stuff like this, it needs to be noticed.
Well, and thank you for the call. I'll tell you something. It all goes back to that, and I'll get to my next caller in just a moment. Remember when he was first elected, we kept hearing all of these people sitting around on TV saying, oh, transformational change, yep, transformational change, yep, man of color, yep, he's got dark skin, man of color, yeah, what's that got to do with balancing the books, winning wars, defending the United States? It's got nothing to do with it. It shows you the shallowness of people in establishment media. You're up next at 8:28.
Well, good morning. It's good to hear you on the air and filling some big shoes. I've listened to Kelly for a lot of years.
Good guy.
Something that I don't see people putting together here, and I put it together since day one, is our president seems to have a very pro-Islamic agenda. And everything he's done has pointed to that, with foreign relations, right up to the Bowe Bergdahl thing, where he did a lot to get Bowe home, and then left Sergeant Tamarisi to rot in a Mexican jail.
Yeah.
Whoever can't draw the lines between these similarities, they're just blind. I think we've got a pro-Muslim, anti-Christian president, regardless of the face he tries to show.
Well, he's certainly not friends of the Jewish people in Israel.
No.
And that's going to get to be a hot topic in the coming weeks. Thank you for the call. I think it's March 3rd. I may be wrong on that date, but I think it's March 3rd that Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to speak to a joint session of Congress. And a couple of stories I happen to see about that this morning. The White House has actually been planting disinformation about Israeli motives and trying to actually blow the cover on some Mossad activities. That's the Israeli Secret Service. And unfortunately for the White House, even some newspapers in Jerusalem, who had often treated Mr. Obama with kid gloves, are now calling him out on it. You're not hearing about it, though. They're not talking about it on MSDNC or on the Clinton News Network or over at CBS, ABC, NBC, or in the Washington Post or New York Times. No, that's another one of those stories that gets buried. So we can sit around and ask the vice president during an interview about Deflategate, because we need the White House and its placeholder's opinion on somebody taking some air out of a football. That's far more important, don't you know? Or we need that woman with the green lipstick sitting there asking the president why her husband has to have the hoods cut off his sweatshirts. Here's a solution: buy sweatshirts without hoods. Duh. That might just be too much, though, for the liberals to put together. 8:31 right now. Bill Colley with you. Coming up, Steve Millington in just a few minutes. On Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington and I have been in the studio talking about everything under the sun, from football games to baseball games. We haven't even mentioned anything about politics, but the chairman of the Twin Falls Republicans joins us on Tuesdays, and he talks a bit about those issues. And so, but I told you earlier in an email, I said the agenda's really up to you today.
Oh boy, that makes it great. Well, then let's talk about football today.
Yes. There's a big game somewhere taking place, I understand, in a few days.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've heard, read in the newspaper, that there's going to be some kind of a, bowl game.
And there are a lot of Seattle bandwagon fans in this area now, people who would have probably been Denver or San Francisco fans for years. And now suddenly Seattle is winning, and all of a sudden, like, that's my favorite team.
That's my team.
I never liked those people. They're like New York Yankee fans. They have to live vicariously through their team.
Oh, okay. Well, the other side of that is that we got a couple of pretty good teams playing in the Super Bowl, but I like the Western United States teams to win. So, although I would not be called a rabid Seattle fan, I kind of hope Seattle does real well.
And they don't cheat. That's another big part of this.
That could be interesting, huh?
I mean, Pete Carroll cheated when he was a college coach, but he's been pretty clean in the NFL.
Yeah.
We need to mention that it's 8:35, just turned 8:35, 31 right now if you're going outside, but looking for a high up near 50 today. I think we're looking at the mid to upper 40s. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio13.com. Yeah, there we go. Dot. We'll have to get a. John Stossel is a stutterer, but he said he works everything out on the air before he goes on. I got to start doing that. It's newsradio1310.com. So after a couple of misfires, I got it out that time. But Bill Colley with Steve Millington until 9 o'clock this morning. A lot, as I mentioned earlier, going on behind the scenes in the legislative session. We may not be hearing about all of it, or people just maybe aren't fully aware of some of the important issues taking place.
Well, I think there's an awful lot of emotional issues that are taking the media by storm. The controversy over the add the words, it's been years and years, and they're now having their hearing, and I don't think they'll get done today. I'll bet it stretches into most of tomorrow. But they are having the hearing, and anybody who wants to deliver a message to the legislators can go put their name on the sheet and take their 3 minutes. Although they don't have a timer set up. They're just encouraging you to be conscious of the time requirement and the many people that we have to. But there's a lot of things going on behind the scene. A senator from over in eastern Idaho named Sidaway, he basically said, we're not interested in any tax cuts until we're really sure that we have figured out how to fund our educational issues correctly.
And he's a powerful man.
I can't remember, shame on me, which committee he's chairman of, but he's chairman of one of the Senate committees, and he has a lot of presence. And so he's just saying, let's not talk about any tax decreases, reduction in rates, until we're sure that we have got this educational thing funded and properly in place. And one of the statements attributed to him this last week was that the governor's plan, 20-point education plan, said we want to raise starting salaries for teachers to the 40,000 mark in 5 years. And Sidaway said, 5 years is a little too long. Can't we figure out how to do it in less time than 5 years? And so that becomes a little problematic. We make sure we got the money. Is the revenue stream going to be sufficient? And that would take a lot of pressure off local school districts. One other thing that's kind of creeping through the legislature below the radar, so to speak, and that is that they want to create a discretionary spending for the local school districts. Now, when you get money from the state, it's pretty much earmarked where you can spend it. You can spend it on salaries, on wage supplies, on this and so the school districts do not have much latitude and flexibility to take the money and say, we got to fix this problem, we have to fix that problem. They don't have that latitude. This bill would give the school districts a lot more discretion on where they spent the money so that they could just have the money show up and say, okay, we have to put it here, or we can use it over here to take care of this. And I think some of those things creeping through that we're going to see. Maybe it's a good thing we have this huge emotional thing out front and let this stuff kind of slide through underneath the radar to get to conclusions.
And some of those conclusions, though, could be, I don't think anyone's in doubt now, after listening even to the governor's remarks, we're going to see higher taxes somewhere, or fees. Now, I had an argument with a state legislator years ago. There was a bill where I was living at the time where they were going to tack on fees for dry cleaners and laundromats. And she said, this is not a tax.
Yeah, right.
And I said, well, all right, so if I take it out of my left pocket, it's a tax. If I take it out of my right pocket, it's a fee because someone's going to pay for it. But there is going to be somewhere a need to address these costs.
They're going to increase the revenue source from somewhere. And one of the major things that's going to happen on that, we're still facing this issue of transportation funding. And the idea of raising the gas tax is still alive out there. It's just a matter of how much and when are we going to see it.
Hold that thought. Steve Millington joining us, Twin Falls County Republican chairman this morning, and he's talking with us about some issues going on statewide that are going to cost you, and maybe your thoughts on that too, following the break. We have 31 coming up on 8:40. This is News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com and Top Story with Bill Colley. Our guest until 9 o'clock this morning, or just before 9 o'clock, is Steve Millington with the Twin Falls Republican Party, and joins us on Tuesday mornings, and we sort of break down some of the activities going on politically, maybe locally, and in the state as well. And we were talking a few minutes ago about what we might see coming in the way of due taxes and fees. And hey, look, I think it's a foregone conclusion that that's going to happen this year to cover some of the expansion of programs in schools and also for road repairs and the like. We were talking off air, Steve, a couple of minutes ago. California yesterday saw the story somewhere yesterday morning that California, because of the drop in gasoline prices, they're not getting the revenue they wanted for gasoline tax. So they're talking about now doing a mileage fee. And in California, some people are in a car sometimes 3 hours a day in their commutes.
Yeah, it may not be very many miles, but they spend a lot of time on the road.
Yeah, and a lot of people there are probably feeling that they can't necessarily keep paying for all of this, and we're not nearly that bad yet always being the key word. We have a caller with us. It's 8:44. 31 right now. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you this morning, along with Steve Millington. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning. I have no doubt that we're looking forward to a state gas tax increase and probably a federal gas tax increase. And we have so much infrastructure that needs to be taken care of. I'm a little bit sympathetic to the tax increase, but does it truly go to our infrastructure spending, or does some of it sneak into the general fund? I'm really curious about your answer on that. Thank you.
Oh boy, I'm curious about my answer as well. State gas tax receipts end up in the Department of Transportation fund. None of that money comes into the general fund. And you may recall in the governor's State of the State, he specifically said we need to do something to increase infrastructure spending for transportation department, but don't come to the general fund looking for money. You figure out how to do it outside of the general fund. Now, I cannot state what happens with the federal gas taxes. Lots of bureaucracy there. On the state level, if we pay state gasoline taxes, that money all goes to the Idaho Department of Transportation. Actually, it's called Idaho Transportation Department, ITD. So if we increased gasoline taxes to produce more revenue for the Transportation Department, that money would all end up going into the transportation budget. None of the money from the general fund is used to pay Transportation Department expenses. And I could be wrong, but I think that all of the salaries and administrative costs of the ITD, Idaho Transportation Department, are all paid from Transportation Department funding. They don't get any subsistence from the general fund to pay their administrative and operational costs. So if we increase the gas taxes by some number, that money would all end up back in the Transportation Department funding program. Now, there's been lots of conversations about how much and when, and nobody knows for sure. That's going to come out of the House, because in Idaho, all taxing and spending originates in the House, doesn't come out of the Senate. The Senate does concur, but it'll start in the House. And I have heard numbers for 2 cents per gallon per year for 5 years. And sidebar, personal note, hit me once. Quit nickel and diming me to death. Just hit me once and be done. Another suggestion was 10 cents a gallon as soon as possible, and be done with it. And another conversation kind of goes like, well, let's have a gas tax increase, but that won't cover our full $200 million shortfall. It'll get to the 100 million range or thereabouts. So we need maybe some more money. So they're looking at registration fees, a tax fee on licensing on automobiles, the mileage tax. Oh boy, I hope not.
We have another caller with us. Steve
Okay.
Millington is in studio with us on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Thanks for your patience. You're up next.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
I like listening to you so far. But anyway, I think I'm the only buddy that pays attention to the news or has a memory. And I can't believe that Steve does not remember this, but I'd like to know why they want to raise our gas tax when they got money to waste, which the only one I know they wasted on is that overhang that's out there on the canyon. And I don't understand why the state of transportation had that kind of money to waste and not on roads. So where else in the state are they wasting money?
I wish I knew the answer to that, and perhaps I am somewhat like you. I drive down the highways and byways, and you go down the freeway and you see all of these flashing yellow signs and the caution, and they're doing some road work, and you kind of move over appropriately and drive past, and there's one guy working and 4 guys holding shovels. And every time I go past that, I say to myself, man alive, that just looks like, I don't have an answer. Now, I do think that sometimes, now I don't know whether ITD paid for the overhang or whether that was Department of Commerce making a tourism, that's called tourism and something, grant to the Twin Falls City to build that overhang. I would have to check and find out who paid for that. I kind of think it might have been Department of Commerce, Tourism, and they have another name behind that, but Travel and Tourism. So that is an interesting point. Sometimes we spend an awful lot of money in places that we question if there's a reasonable payback. And so your question is very valid. Where is it coming from, and why do we do those kinds of things?
We have another caller with us. Steve, of course, taking some calls this morning. It's 8:51 and 31 right now on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and you're up next.
Steve, you know what I'd really like to hear is not about talking about raising taxes, but how do we create more jobs that will create more revenue? That's what we need to be talking about across the whole country, not tax increases.
That is an extremely valid point, and I share your frustration and a sense of discouragement, because I don't think that in the state of Idaho we push as hard as and maybe we're pushing everywhere we can, but it's not apparent. I think we need to be pushing harder to create good jobs in Idaho, to bring good jobs into our state. And there's 2 or 3 things I think that'll help that immensely. One of them is a properly trained and skilled workforce. And that means more than just college degrees. That means we have good, solid people who have technical degrees, trade schools, apprenticeships, community college type stuff. There's excellent, wonderful jobs out there for people who can perform in that field, and they can do very, very well. I don't think that we sing our song long enough or loud enough for people to hear what Idaho has to offer. And I would just like to be on the inside for a day or two so that I could say, yeah, we really are doing this, rather than always looking back and say, why didn't we get that job? How come they went to Colorado or Utah rather than Idaho? We're as good as those places at our labor force. We get high marks all the time on employee retention and quality of that.
Two things. You bring this up, and I was telling you during the break, I was talking to the fellow who was installing my cable yesterday, and he moved here 10 years ago from San Francisco because he said they came to Kimberly. They knew that this was an area to raise kids because of the low crime rate, good quality of life in that sense. You can get around everywhere easily. There's a selling point. Number two, there's a story on our website this morning about a new coffee stand opening up in town, and the folks who are opening it moved back here. They were Idaho natives to open it up because, again, they see a need, but they also see a great quality of life. So you're right. No one is basically going around saying this is a wonderful place to do business and live.
Well, there was an article in the paper in the last month or so about the boring cities. And Burley was on there and Twin Falls was on there. And I beg your pardon. I want to know what kind of criteria they use to determine what makes a boring city. Because you can do so many things and have so much opportunity and outdoor recreation and
any kind of food you like at a restaurant. The mall has a big movie theater. You can get down there and see a movie if you like. You can do some sightseeing. I don't fully understand that either.
I'm with you. I have a tough time with some of that. I really do. And
you know what they mean? They mean we're not terribly liberal.
I think that's in as much as it comes from the news media. I think you're probably right.
Yes.
Now, at the same time, there was an article in one of the business publications that I read regularly that said that Idaho is in the top 10, and I want to say number 5, but don't quote me on that one, as far as new business creation. And they talk about the atmosphere and the business environment and the low regulations. And I'm thinking to myself, that's what we need to be getting people to look at, and prospective employers relocating plants and facilities. Let's come to Idaho. Give me a break here, people. This is a great place to be. Now, even as I spout off and say, we need to do this, come to Idaho, just don't increase my traffic pattern. And when you come, don't expect to bring some of your goofball ideas with you. Leave them at the border.
I see that happen. And I came here myself. I'm a transplant.
Yeah, we're watching to see what you do, Bill.
I came here as a transplant from southern Delaware, which Delaware is a small state, but the southern part of it, the Republican chairman used to joke, the state chairman, and he was a past president of the NRA, and John Sigler. And John would joke, he said, the southern part of the state is like Birmingham, Alabama. And he said, the northern part of the state is suburban Philadelphia. But we would get all of these people moving in because there were low property taxes and no sales tax. They would come from New Jersey, and then they would immediately say, we need to have. And I said, well, you came here. How do you think this is going to affect that tax structure? It's like they're absolutely clueless about how this works.
Well, our caller said, we need to create a better business climate, increase our business activity, and that produces more revenue. And he's right. We have a revenue structure in the state of Idaho that comes from income taxes, from sales taxes, and from property taxes, and that's a pretty good three-legged stool. It may need some refinements, but it's not too shabby. And the way we make that bigger and stronger is to increase our workforce and our labor opportunities so that people come here, they spend money, that's sales taxes, they earn wages, that's income taxes, and they own property, that's property taxes. Now, none of us like to pay, nobody hates taxes like I hate taxes. Nobody. But there are some things we have to do. And one of them was we have to provide for the common good of the people. And that is infrastructure costs. We have to build. How do we get around in the state of Idaho if we don't have real good quality roads?
Yeah. Takes a long time on a horse.
Oh, yeah. Can't get there from here.
Yeah. We have just a few seconds to go. Steve Millington, of course, Twin Falls Republicans.
Just want to make mention, we are coming up on the Lincoln Day banquet for the Twin Falls County, and that's February the 28th at Canyon Crest. The tickets are $45 a piece. You can go to twinfallsrepublicans.com and you can use your credit card to buy your tickets. We're going to have a great evening. We're going to have great people, great food, great fun. Brad Little, Lieutenant Governor, will be our keynote speaker. We have had confirmations from the governor and a couple of congressional officers. One of the best Lincoln Day banquets in the entire state of Idaho is in Twin Falls County, February 28th. You'll love it.
And Mr. Little may actually be, how shall we put it, sometime due for a promotion. So it'd be good to meet him.
Yeah, he may be working on a promotion, so there's a great chance to get acquainted.
All right. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks, Bill. See you next week.
All right, Steve Millington joining us this morning, Twin Falls County Republican Party. We've got one more hour of the program coming up. Look, a couple of things I wanted to mention that we've got to get to, but one of those is I have some thoughts coming out of Canada, by the way, about this Add the Words project and why it isn't necessary. And we'll share that with you in the next hour. It's also really about big government and control. More details ahead. And tomorrow on the program, we're going to be joined. It's the 29th anniversary of the Shuttle Challenger disaster. We're going to be joined on the program tomorrow by Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil, who was the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission. And he didn't live far from here at one time when he was serving with the Air Force Thunderbirds. In fact, he knows this area very well. More on that coming up later. We spent a good deal of time yesterday, and I'm not the first person to ever talk about this, the controversy over Add the Words. Now has gone to a hearing in Boise, state legislative hearing. It'll be perhaps even a 3-day hearing before it's all said and done. And according to the Associated Press today, there was some very emotional testimony yesterday from people who are claiming that they've been discriminated against because of their sexual preference. In other words, they may not get the housing that they wanted, or they perhaps believe they were fired from a job because of that sexual preference. So I was listening to some of the discussion over the last few weeks on this from a variety of sources, and we've talked about it, plenty on this program in the first few weeks that I've been here. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, right now 32, possibly going up to near 50 degrees today. Again, another very sunny day on tap with a few more clouds, but it will be somewhat of a pattern that will be with us most of the week and only gradually cool off as we head toward the weekend. Why? Because it's your weekend and you were thinking, hey, I can get outside and do something. No, it'll get colder, believe me. The worst can happen, it will, right? That's how you have to look at that. I do thank you for joining me, Bill Colley, on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. In light of this discussion that's taking place right now at the state capitol, I happened to see something this morning. A writer, he's from Brantford, Ontario. That's the hometown of Wayne Gretzky. He's a college professor in Brantford, Ontario, and he was writing a piece at a magazine called Crisis. And I saw it posted this morning online. His name is Joe Bissonette. And he was writing the legalization. This is a related issue, to add the words. The legalization of same-sex marriage does not bring with it the innocent blood which cries to heaven, such as abortion does, though it is perhaps the single most audacious social engineering initiative in American history. So he's talking about what's going on in this country. The Supreme Court is going to be talking about this, U.S. Supreme Court, probably before we end this term. If not, it'll happen next year. He said it's important for Americans to look at what has happened in Canada, because it's been now almost a decade since Canada became the fourth country to legalize same-sex marriage. Even though several provinces had already legalized it, the federal government in Canada, July 20th, 2005, went forward and legalized it nationwide. He says something very significant happened with the legalization of marriage in Canada, and it wasn't about the freedom of gay people to marry, and it wasn't really about marriage. Free speech, he writes, the rights of parents, the right to preach and practice one's religion, and the worn and tattered fibers of normative decency were all deeply damaged. With the legalization of same-sex marriage, what had been aberrant only a few years earlier became entrenched as a legal right, and what had been a normal and natural view of sexuality had been reduced to the retrograde thinking of hate crime dinosaurs. Restrictions on freedoms, forced sex education, sexually confused children, sexual experimentation among children, muzzling and debilitating the church, more births out of wedlock, more in vitro fertilizations, more abortions, more poverty, more misery, more disease, more addictions, and higher health care costs. And he is citing some research that backs him up on all of these issues. says the Bible, and this is a quote from one of his archbishops, the Bible is being called hate literature. Clearly the church is in the crosshairs. There will be growing pressure for the church to comply or be shut down. The writer goes on to say, in the new same-sex marriage regime, these simple and obvious truths must be appended with a caveat saying that there is no such thing as nature. Human sexuality is plastic, and there is nothing essentially organic, good, and true. He goes on to write, it is also a decisive step toward the destruction of critical intelligence, the cultivation of abject dependence, and then finally madness and totalitarianism. Why, you may ask? He says, Doug Mainwaring works with Canavox, a project of the Witherspoon Institute. He is a self-described gay man who is abstinent. According to Mainwaring, gays and lesbians have been used as pawns by liberals to bring about this wedge issue that I really feel strongly is meant to usher in incremental totalitarianism. In other words, the people who are going to these hearings in places like Boise and other locations and making their arguments, they may be very heartfelt about this. But according to this Doug Mainwaring, who's a friend of mine on Facebook, he says the ultimate goal is they're being used by other people who would like to silence dissent on a great many issues. The writer says legalization of same-sex marriage is not about allowing something. Get that. The legalization of same-sex marriage is not about allowing something. Same-sex marriage was already taking place. You see, you understand that. Somebody could have gone into a church that did permit same-sex marriage and they could have gotten married. The government didn't recognize it, but they could still claim they were married. You can't arrest two people for claiming that they're married. You can't arrest two people any longer for cohabitating. Not in Canada, not in the United States. Government, first of all, shouldn't be involved in any of this, but this is the point that he's making. It was not about recognizing something spousal and survivor benefits, family tax incentives, and any other advantages to marriage were being or could have been granted without calling it marriage. It was about the state denying the right to speak one of the most obvious truths about human nature. Think about that for a minute. The state is now in charge of deciding what is right and wrong when it comes to your sexuality, and if you criticize, you're going to possibly be brought up on hate charges. The other part of that is the destruction of a Christian culture. Someone said to me today, before I got onto this topic, somebody off air, said that this is not compatible with traditional Christianity because traditional Christianity says it's a sin. Well, therefore, we have to shut down traditional Christianity or silence it. And at some point, it could become illegal to bring up these topics. There is a fellow from Kansas. He is a rarity in the Roman Catholic Church. His name is Charles Chaput, and he is the Archbishop of Philadelphia. Grew up in Kansas. He's rare in that he's actually an indigenous American on one side of his family. And so he's one of the first Indians to actually rise to that level in his church. He is barred from speaking in Canada because in 2007, he was visiting and he gave a speech in Toronto where he said tolerance is not a Christian virtue. Well, what was he talking about? He was talking about this particular issue. Because that is hurtful to so many people, he could have been jailed there. He's simply told not to come back. Now, it's underway in this country, and this is the point we need to make with all of this. And the writer is saying it really has nothing to do with what you see at face value. It has nothing to do with the rights of anybody to marry or to add the words put into a constitution or into law. It has nothing to do with that. It is ultimately about criminalizing free speech and freedom of religion and your freedom of thought. Think about that for a moment. It used to be you could at least walk down the street thinking something and it wouldn't be a crime. But not any longer in this country. We're headed in that direction, and they're looking to control every aspect of that. Now, if you think that this is overwrought and that we complain too much about government interference in our lives, in some other related stories, the Wall Street Journal today says U.S. spies on millions of cars. The Drug Enforcement Agency uses license plate readers to build database for federal and local police. Now, we've been hearing about a great many states that are already doing this on their own, but the DEA, under the guise of doing this to track drug crimes, that would be people who are coming across the southern border often, They don't apply it to the northern border, I guess, but often to do that, the DEA has been photographing automobiles. Well, this technology has spread to the point where they can not only read your license plate and get all of the data, because the plates are embedded now with all of this technology to make it easier for the cameras to read them, but oftentimes they are taking photographs of the driver. And get this, these are clear photographs, so you're clearly identifiable in that picture. They can also even pick up your passengers in the back seat. And now this is all being fed into a large government database. Well, we need it to keep people safe. Yeah, all right. You know what? If they want to chain you and lock you in your house all day long, and you may not then ever have to worry about safety, unless I guess the house burns. But if you want to be Velcroed to the wall all day long, yeah, you probably won't be involved in a car accident. And you can have a government minder there. That'll take care of our unemployment program. A government minder there watching you 24/7. Wouldn't that be nice? It's called North Korea. This is the direction we could potentially be heading with all of this. Officials have publicly said that they track vehicles near the border to help fight drug cartels. What has not been previously disclosed is that Drug Enforcement Agency has spent years working to expand the database throughout the United States. So there you have it. Many devices also record visual images of drivers and passengers, and it just gets worse and worse. I shared this story with a friend who wrote me back this morning and explained, and I see these on Blue Lakes Boulevard. You know, you drive down the street, and if you're doing 29, suddenly a light flashes and tells you you're doing 29. And, you know, these are used commonly in school zones because it's about, well, we must keep the children safe. And I did a story about one of these. When these first came out in the 1990s, I was working at a TV station. I did a story, and it was all about how good it was that we could have these in neighborhoods near schools. So if you were driving 5 miles over the speed limit, you'd go, oh, gee, I got to slow down. But he's telling me that these things are also equipped with the ability to scan your automobile, take your photograph, and do all of these things, and again, be fed back into that database. He takes it to a conclusion no one would like to hear. He says it's all going to the, quote, fusion centers, unquote. So there's another frightening part of it. And then lastly, since we're still on this topic about government overreach on all of these issues, Wesley Pruden, he's the editor emeritus of the Washington Times, retired but continues to write a column for that publication. He says the Democrats are trying to assault your free speech, and he's talking about what's happened in places like Britain. And he said in Britain, the government convicted a white supremacist for sending a threatening anti-Semitic tweet, a Muslim teenager for a Facebook posting that all soldiers should die and go to hell, and a man for making anti-Muslim comments. And of course, in France and Germany, if you deny the Holocaust, you can go to jail. One of the points of which the religious folk of Europe, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim agree is that saying mean and offensive things about religion ought to be against the law. Well, now, since so many Democrats and liberals in this country would like to be just like Europe, some Democrats, stung by rejection, he writes, by the voters, want to revise and tame speech too. If persuasion won't work, maybe compulsion will. Senator Charles Schumer of New York, there's a real manly man, unhappy with the decisions of the Supreme Court, has proposed amending the Constitution to give the government the power and right to regulate political speech. They're already trying it in talk radio. Well, we know that for years. They've been trying to silence us, whether we be on the national level or on the local level. They're going to be trying it with the internet in February. I believe it's February 26th. President Obama's Federal Communications Commission is going to look to take over the internet and then start regulating it. In other words, there will be restrictions on what you can do and say when you log online. So here we go. But it's for your own good, don't you understand? We here in the government are so much smarter. We know so much more than you do. You dumb dummies, if we didn't protect you. Remember the movie Time Machine? When they did the remake about 10 years ago, the albino tells him at the end, I have to control the Morlocks because if I didn't, they'd exhaust the food supply. They see you as the Morlocks, and they need to control you. This is a very serious threat to your future, your children's future, and your grandchildren's future, if they will ever live to see it. 20 after 9. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Did you know toilet paper is getting smaller in this country? We'll give you details coming up. Have you noticed, and I know this is perhaps one of those too much information questions, but have you noticed that the roll on your toilet paper is smaller? It is. I mean, we're not making this up. The Washington Post carries this story today. You're going to have to spare more than a square. Toilet paper is shrinking. Well, the Taliban and some of the ISIS people, they just simply use their hands, live in caves and all. But, it's here we're a little bit more civilized, or we would think we would be. 924, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Temperature 33. Look at that. Warming up very quickly this morning. You can reach me at 736-0300. The story says that the average square in a toilet roll, they were once 4.5 inches wide and 4.5 inches long. However, the standard has shifted. Or at the very least, it's loosened its grip on the industry to a point where companies are selling sheets that are a half-inch shorter or thinner, or both. Rolls are becoming narrower. Cardboard tubes are getting bigger. Well, you can make little bunny rabbits out of them. My daughter used to watch a TV show when she was a little girl, and we were living in Vermont at the time. And there was a fellow out of Canada on CBC who'd worked with Fred Rogers, and then he went north to work in Canada and did a show called Mr. Dress Up. And it was the same type of idea. As a parent, it was annoying. Children love it. But he used to take toilet paper rolls and some cotton, and he'd make little bunnies. And I'd be trying to do work around the house, and she'd go strip toilet paper in the bathroom and come and ask me to make a bunny with her. So I'd have to put down whatever chores I was doing, get out some glue, and take care of that to keep her amused for a while. She's a grown-up now, and her interests have changed, luckily. Toilet paper sales, the writer says, have barely budged in recent years, but the value per weight has. The same few companies that make toilet paper, I thought there were many, but it says the few that make it, also make other paper products, and those products haven't been selling well lately. Apparently Americans aren't using napkins as often as they used to. Well, the Democrats would say those are all Republicans. Oh, they just walk around dragging their knuckles and just food all over them. I will admit, I have some friends, albeit I don't know their political persuasion, but that's about how they eat. And they could just use their sleeves or their arms or whatever else. The thing about toilet paper rolls is that unlike paper towels, they're much harder to replace or even ration. Companies understand this very well, so what they're trying to do, they haven't necessarily changed the price on the toilet rolls. They've made them smaller so they can continue to bring in some extra money to cover their backsides. When it comes to, because they're not selling as many paper towels or napkins, and if you go to the bathroom at the grocery store, it's often a hand dryer, which we are told are not necessarily any better for sanitation. Then, you use the hand dryer, then you walk over and you grab the bathroom door, which is covered in all sorts of, terrible things. And you've already picked up the grocery cart, and if you didn't wipe it down with one of the handy wipes they put up front, you probably already got whatever disease somebody had that used it just before you. So going into the bathroom and washing your hands and then air drying them afterwards may not necessarily help you. It's estimated you touch your nose a couple of thousand times a day. So by the time you made it from one end of the store to the other, you've done that. Here's a solution, though, and I was thinking about this as long ago as Sunday. I had just picked up a copy of the Times News. It's $2 on Sunday. What does a roll of toilet paper cost you? Well, you can get a single roll sometimes. And sometimes you might, if you get them on discount, you can pay, 80, 90 cents for a single roll? And then if you buy a big pack, maybe a pack of 8 or 16, you spend a few dollars. But if you think about it, you get a newspaper on a Sunday for $2. And it's very thick because of all the advertising, too. And it's got a lot of different sections filled with AP copy. Well, they only got 3 local stories in it. Come on, folks. But you pick that up, and you might start with the editorial page. But you could kill 2 birds with one stone. You get to read the comics on Sunday, and maybe a couple of sports stories, and then the rest of the week you don't have to worry about buying any toilet paper. And I think it's a fine use. It's called recycling. And I think that the liberals at that newspaper would be overjoyed if you would do as they say, not necessarily as they do, and recycle more often. So that's my recommendation today. I'm going to be picking up a Sunday paper, and I don't have to worry about toilet paper the remainder of the week. Problem solved. It's 9:28. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 9:29, you're up next.
Good morning. You're forgetting to mention the fact about the newsprint. You want that newsprint wiped all over your body?
It's already all over my fingers.
Or on your fingers?
Yeah, when you finish reading it, you look at your fingers and they're all purplish.
You know what?
What's that?
I've been listening to you ever since you come on, and the more I listen to you, the better I like you. You've got talent. You've got a lot of good ideas. You are politically in the right realm. I'll quit bragging on you. You're all right, guy.
A check's in the mail. Thank you for the call. I was going to say that newsprint. This is why a lot of people are criticized for just getting their news from television, but it doesn't get your hands all dirty. I read that actually in a newspaper in the comic strip Shoe many years ago. And that Shoe was interviewing somebody about why they only watch TV for news. Very simple explanation. It's a lot cleaner. 9:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, I've got more coming up. We have a problem with a measles outbreak in this country. It might be that peace train that came from Guatemala. More details ahead. So there has been some talk in the last few days about measles outbreak popping up in some parts of the United States. And it's caused a bit of alarm in some corners. I saw some things today as I was getting ready for the show that sort of, roused my curiosity a bit as to the cause. And I think some folks in media are trying to dance around it, but I think it's a fairly simple explanation. Washington Examiner, this by Paige Winfield Cunningham. National vaccination rates haven't dropped despite anti-vaccination hype. The percentage of kids who receive no vaccinations has not changed, the Centers for Disease Control reported last August. And the number of children who did not get vaccinations remained high, well within the 90 to 95% range. Medical experts say is necessary to ensure infectious diseases don't spread. Nearly 92% of kids in the U.S. got their measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines in 2013. That would be the last year that happens to be on record. Vaccine skeptics on the rise, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, I have some friends. In fact, Suzanne, my significant other and intended, she has a friend who's a chiropractor who refuses to have her daughter vaccinated, saying that she believes that vaccines are just simply an effort to try really to control us. She might go too far. I had all of these vaccines when I was young. I think I didn't get mumps, and I did come down with that. And I had chickenpox, which was nasty business when I was in the second grade. On Halloween, of all things, too, I couldn't go out. And so my sister took my bucket, took it around the neighborhood, told everybody that her brother was homesick, and I made out like a bandit. So sometimes being the victim is, I guess, not always a bad thing. It's a bit like government. They just throw a lot more at you. It's 9:35. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And it's 34. On our way perhaps up to about 48 before the day is over. The measles outbreak, the reporter at Wall Street Journal says, that began at California's Disneyland last month, is part of a new trend that worries public health officials. Large outbreaks in the U.S. of a highly infectious disease have become more common in the past 2 years, even though the measles hasn't been, and I underline this word, indigenous since 2000. So for 15 years, we haven't had any issues with the measles arising in this country. 15 years. Why all of a sudden are we seeing these pockets of outbreaks? And these are getting passed around more frequently. Now, some argue that some people just don't want to get the vaccines for religious reasons, or they believe for scientific reasons it's not a good idea. But those figures have not significantly changed. The key here is simply that word indigenous. You remember that it's not in the media any longer. A fellow mentioned this in the last hour of the program. Media covers a story for a little while, and then all of a sudden that story goes away. You remember that there was this train that was roaring from Central America, bringing children from Guatemala and Honduras up through Mexico, and they were climbed on top of the train. They were hanging off the sides of the train, and they ended up showing up and being taken care of in droves by border agents who should have been patrolling the border. They were changing diapers and feeding the children and getting them bedding and the like. And then Mr. Obama and his minions in Washington decided, these are potentially future Democrat Party voters. We'll redistribute them all over the country. So they put them on buses, and they sent them to small cities and small towns all over America. And then because they said they didn't want anyone harassing these poor children, We couldn't know where they had all gone. They were, in many cases, quietly moved into these communities. Families were given thousands of dollars, I think it was $7,000 of your tax money, to take care of any of these children that they housed for 90 days. Then, I don't know, I guess they get another payment. And usually these are fellow travelers among the Democrats who are taking care of the children and then sucking up your tax dollars so that they can stay at home and say, if we keep you here until you're an adult, you can go out and get money easily too. You just have to vote for the right party. Could it be that many of these children who are arriving and have now been sequestered quietly into different corners of our country did not have their vaccinations and brought along with them such diseases as measles? And now we're seeing outbreaks throughout the country. These are wonderful children. Before we may have to send them back because of evil Republicans, let's take them over to Disney World and show them what America can really be like. So now you have an outbreak at Disneyland. I guess it was Disneyland, not Disney World. Did I say Disney World? They both look relatively the same. The one in Florida might have a few more Crocs. But here's the root of your problem, isn't it? Oh, but we have to do it. It's the right thing to do. That's always what you hear from you'll read a newspaper editorial, and usually the Marxist-Leninist writing that is always saying, oh, but it's the right thing to do. According to whom? Well, according to our side. It's the right thing to do. I don't think it is. Well, that's because you're a racist bigot. Yeah, but I don't want my kid coming down with measles and potentially dying. Well, it's the right thing to do. Kids have been dying all over Central America, and your child has white privilege. So therefore, it's only fair that perhaps a few of your children die so that we can be nice to these future Democrat Party voters. Don't you know? I don't know how you answer this question, folks, other than we just have to get some backbone and learn to say no. And I also noticed this too. I've seen polls. It's not just red state America. Even a lot of people in blue state America agree on this issue. So why can't we get any action done? Well, because they're also cheap labor. Oh, I see. And the Wall Street tycoons are handing money off to people like John Boehner saying, hey, I need a few more of these kids to work for peanuts. We're in kind of a bind, aren't we? 9:40. Bill Colley with you. Got more coming up in just a couple of minutes. The Obama White House, by the way, would also like to stop paying doctors as much money for Medicare patients. Details ahead. There are more details on the charges that look like they're pending now shortly against Trader Bergdahl, America's closest friend of the Taliban. If you check out our website, newsradio1310.com, you can get the latest on all of that. Also, there's a story that says that the Twin Falls city finances are looking good. That's probably because they didn't go out and spend a fortune on the new city hall that some people thought they should have. They thought, they wanted something the size of the Roman Colosseum, so that the city could then turn around and rent out space in that and compete with private business. Yeah, there's a wonderful thing. Your government coming along and cutting your throat that way. So they did the more sensible thing, and they went with the building that would be better to serve you and the taxpayers. So some details on all of that if you check out our website. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. You can reach the program today. If you're under quarantine, by the way, I think you can still call. I don't think measles is spread over the telephone. 736-0300. That is 736-0300. We're into the stretch run of the program. Mike Huckabee coming up in about 5 minutes, and then I'll have a couple of minutes just to say goodbye. But a couple of things caught my attention that I thought I'd mention today, too. AP story, Republican U.S. Senator Jim Risch derailed the 2010 wilderness bill, but says he's working now with U.S. Representative Mike Simpson on a scaled-down version as others attempt to persuade the president to designate a central Idaho area a national monument. In other words, we've already got the federal government controlling 2/3 of the state. Let's give them some more control. And once they control that, then they can dictate to the state even more. You're up next at 9:45 on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Bill, it's not just that the liberals think it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter if it's morally wrong or mathematically wrong. They think it's the right thing to do. More than that, we did it to the Indians. So what's the difference?
Well, I don't know that we did it to all of the Indians.
I know that, but that's what they say. Well, we came over here, and don't you hear all the time we murdered all the Indians. So who's on the reservation?
You know
You know,
something?
we're a
Yeah,
bunch of killers, you know, and we came down here, we shot everybody. So why are they still here? Why are we still paying them a lot of money?
I think if the liberals are that, if they're that guilty, feel that their consciences are racked by guilt, perhaps they all need to fly to Europe. They can move into those Muslim enclaves and settle down and have great lives.
Yeah, that's the liberal way, though. You know, you shoot 10, you've shot 100. You know, they just want to blow everything out of proportion. But yet, I don't know if they know how to balance the checkbook. Do you think they know how to balance the checkbook?
Hey, thank you. And no, I don't. In fact, this morning there was a great story. I read this at Washington Examiner editorial about the spending in this country. The president bragged in his State of the Union speech last week that he has greatly reduced the deficit. Well, actually, what's happened is it has settled back into the high that it was before he took office. So instead of trillion and $1.2 trillion yearly deficits, we're back to just under half a trillion, which was where we were at before he became president. So he's bragging because we've returned to what was already a bad scene. Do you realize since he's taken office that that debt service I think has grown from 39% of GDP, that's gross domestic product for you public school graduates, to 74%? And we look at Greece and we see Greece tottering on the brink of collapse over the last 5 years and a completely destroyed civilization because they couldn't control debt and they wanted to give everybody everything under the moon, sun, and stars. And look, we've got the same damn thing brewing here. And I hate to use strong language like that, but frankly, I don't know any other nicer way to say it. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Yeah, Bill, your last caller asked a question that really needs to be answered. I understand that a lot of stuff is wrong in this country, but who is on those reservations, and why were they put down to such some of the worst ground in this country?
Because at the time,
they go breaking they make a deal with them, and then they break it, and then the Indians get upset. It just gets worse and worse until they got them down so small an area that they can't do anything but starve to death.
well, and what's happened since then is a great many of them have simply left the reservation and blended in with the culture at large. But we all have to admit that the mindset at the time was that they simply had to be cleared from the land. I'm not excusing it. I'm just telling you all over the world people were taking these views of other races, and it was not uncommon. And in fact, many of those 500 nations or so that they call them that existed here before the arrival of the Europeans, many of them fought and warred with each other and scalped each other and killed each other and took land from each other and resources from each other and raped women and kidnapped children and did all of those things too. So it wasn't all pleasant. It wasn't like some Disney film where Pocahontas is canoeing down a river with a couple of birds talking to her. 949. Thank you much for the call. Is it a tragedy? Yes. But you know why all of those people ended up here from Europe? Because they were getting, in many cases, pushed off their land. My ancestors primarily are here because they were pushed off their land. Some English lord wanted their land in Ireland or Scotland, and so they ended up having to come to this country. Their only other option was starvation. What are they supposed to do? And behavior after that when people came here, just that was considered to be the norm. So it happened. You remember there were people who were kept in bondage in this country too in its initial stages. Was it right? I don't think so. But it happened, and people thought it's very difficult. The great historian William Manchester, who wrote a trilogy about Winston Churchill, once said, it's very difficult to judge people by our own standards and norms today from the eras that they lived in. The Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. And again, the Huckabee Report brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. He mentions eating chicken wings during the Super Bowl. I graduated college May of 1984, and the Super Bowl that previous January, a few months earlier, had been between the Washington Redskins and the Oakland Raiders, actually one of the bigger upsets in Super Bowl history. And a handful of friends and I, we decided to go off campus to one of our favorite watering holes where there was a party planned, but it turned out not many people showed up for the party. So they brought out these platters of chicken wings, and there were so many and so few people, I ate 70 of them. I think that's some sort of record. 9:40 or 9:55 now. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story. A couple of minutes before we wrap up today. I'll get back to the telephones. Let's do that instead. See what's on the minds of some of the callers. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 736-0300. You're up next.
Bill, I just wanted to clarify something. I don't want anybody to think that I'm heartless. I mean, what happened to the Indians was horrible. Still is horrible. But some of it they brought on ourselves, and some of it we did. But I want to ask everybody out there, including the liberals, if you go back in your history, I don't care what race you are, you'll find out that somebody conquered somebody. There is no country that's settled right now, not one country that is settled right now that wasn't settled through brutal war.
We now know historically, too, and science has backed it up, that some Europeans actually got to North America perhaps 14,000 years ago. They just followed the ice from the glaciers and settled in the area now we would know as the Tidewater region of Virginia. They somehow vanished. They may have well been killed by someone else moving into the area.
Yeah, but that's my point. I come from Hawaii, and King Kamehameha conquered every island until there was all his. We got the island people right now saying that they stole our land. King Kamehameha owned everything.
I think he's also
allowed people to stay on property.
I think he's also the fellow. I think he's also the fellow who burned his cousin to death, who was a rival, by taking him to the top of a hill and claiming it was a sacrifice, staked him down, and they burned the fellow to death.
Well, a lot of that happened. That's my point. Everybody acts like we're uncivilized, and this was all uncivilized. This was happening everywhere. Everywhere.
Sure.
I mean, if we want to go back to the way it is now, us gun-toting people would be shooting liberals, but that's not the way you do things now. We argue over this radio station. We try to find a common ground. That is the way we try to do it now, but it's not the way it used to be.
I thank you for the input. And normally I don't allow people 2 calls in one particular day, but he makes a great point, and I think it's worthwhile to consider. Western Europe was forced to come across the Atlantic in many cases simply because the Golden Horde and other invaders, Mongols coming and heading eastward, just started pushing the population westward. And this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so if you'd like to track the roots of this, it goes back to Asia. People came from Asia across the land bridge at the Bering Strait, we're told, but also people from Asia were pushing westward in Eurasia and through Europe, and that pushed people across the Atlantic too. At some point, when you sit down though and look at the DNA of all of these people, it's not radically different, is it? And I think it's at least there's some rationale in that if somebody is really your distant relative, that yes, maybe, and if you're a Christian, for instance, you would believe that everyone is a child of God. And so you've got to get beyond these arguments. Bad things do happen. Got to learn to forgive. 9:58. Tomorrow, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil joining us on the show. Scheduled to join us to talk about his experience as the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission. Tomorrow being the 29th anniversary of that disaster that really, for all intents and purposes, was the beginning of the end of the U.S. space program. Rush Limbaugh is coming up following news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Sean Hannity at 1 o'clock, and then Glenn Beck this afternoon, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.